who's in New York.
Hi, everybody. I'm Helen.
Hi, Helen. Do you see us? We see you.
I see you. I wish I was there. I love your bookstore so much.
I wanted to tell you I was at your favorite restaurant last night. Sorry.
Did you tell them how we met, Linda?
I didn't. We were so busy talking about your book, but I can tell them before we leave.
Okay.
Okay.
Good story.
Great to see you. We all agree how well crafted this book is. It's incredible. And I guess, just now we were talking, and I figured that the title came from what Meredith called herself in the very beginning, that she was a lucky dog. But do you want to get into that a little more about how you came up with the title? But then I want to talk about really, where did you start on the page with this story?
Sure. I think that both of these women are cursed by beauty, and that when people see beautiful women, they think they're so lucky. They think that they're blessed and they have nothing to complain about. I mean, they're both really beautiful, and but that beauty got them into a lot of trouble. I'm not saying those bad things don't happen to people who aren't beautiful, but especially for Meredith, for Mary. So they're the kind of girls you'd call a lucky dog. So when she says on the first page, Paris was terrible even for a lucky dog like me, she's talking about the fact that she has lots of money and she's been a TV star, starlet, whatever it is. And, she never finished. I mean, she never even really went to high school, excuse me. And she self-emancipated at 15, and she's been successful. But I think her life has been so tragic and so difficult. So it was an ironic title. Yeah. And then also the irony is carried further with the fact that men have always referred to women as dogs. Yeah, it's got a lot of, I thought, layered meaning in it.
Yeah.
Girl. Yeah.
Well, when you started this book, there's just, I know I read your author's note. We know what inspired the two main characters. My question always goes to how much of those characters, those real characters, fed into these two characters. Like, where did they come in and then end? How did you imagine them?
This was really a crazy book for me. I mean, I felt like a story fell into my lap. I tend to research like crazy, and I had been spending a lot of time researching Civil War because I thought America was on the precipice of a civil war, and I was very interested in Bosnia. I happened to hear Alexander Hamon give a talk when Trump was first elected, and I don't know if you guys know who he is, Sasha Hamon. He's a Bosnian writer, and he said, you don't think it can happen to your beautiful country, but I'm here to tell you it can and it will. I mean, he was very scary, but his home was Sarajevo, and neighbor turned on neighbor. And that's my big fear for our country, that we're so turned against each other. So I was thinking about it. And I was thinking about Israel because I'm Jewish, and it's hard not to think about it and the complications there. And so those happened to be the three countries I was thinking about. And when I read Ronan Farrow's article about this woman, Stella Penn-Pekenak, who was hired by David Boies, who was the attorney who did Bush v. Gore and gay marriage, but also was a Theranos attorney and was the attorney for Harvey Weinstein. contacted Ehud Barak, who was the prime minister of Israel, to find the best spy. And he came up with this woman, and they spent a lot of money on her. And her job was to destroy Rose McGowan. So it just felt like everything that was in my head fell into my lap with one story. And so I definitely took the contours of that story. I mean, I'm not going to hide it. It's a great story, and it was not really explored in all the noise of Me Too and Weinstein. But then once I did that, I made the characters my own characters. And I imagined, you know, they didn't meet in Paris, and I know nothing about Rose McGowan's mother, and, you know, the contours of Nina's family were different from the family of Stella Penn-Peckinack. But Stella Penn-Peckinack's family had saved Jews during the war from the Nazis, and they were airlifted from Sarajevo to Israel as righteous Gentiles. And for me, being Jewish and having lost so many relatives in the Holocaust, that was all so complicated and so fascinating. But then I extrapolated. I mean, I don't know if she was in the army. I don't know what she did. So yeah, but it reminds me of, you know, I don't know if that was in that author's note or not, but Michelangelo always said that he could see in the marble, he could see the angel in the marble. And that's what it felt like to me, that there was this story and I could unearth it and give it new life. So that's what I did. I mean, I really thought I was going to start in Sarajevo, and that would be the opening of the book, but I couldn't get to Sarajevo. And I started writing it, and I did a lot of research. I really research heavy, and I wrote like 20 pages. And then I thought, you know what? I know Paris. I've taught a lot in Paris. I'm going to start this book in Paris. I'm going to have her run away. And so I wrote that section. And then I somehow bizarrely convinced Jackie Gifford, who's the head of travel and leisure. She's their executive editor. We had lunch and she said, what do you want to write about? And I said, well, I really want to write about dark travel. Dark travel is this thing that's hot in travel, where people want to go to horrible places where horrible things happened and experience them.
Okay.
That's not what I want to do on my vacations. I have enough of that in my real life. But I had read about this man who turned his home in Sarajevo into a war hotel. And his shtick was that you could go there and experience what it was like for him during the war. So you could stay in his basement. There would be no light. There'd be no clocks. There'd be no food. There'd be no water. It would be cold. You wouldn't know what day it was. I told this to my best friend, and she was like, you're not allowed to do that because I won't be able to deal with you when you get out of there, you know. And I told this to Jackie, who was like, well, we do luxury travel, you know. But then she came back to me 3 months later and said, you know, somebody pitched us a luxury adventure travel story in Bosnia. Do you want to do it? And I said, sure. Well, there is no luxury travel in Bosnia. Bosnia is still a war-torn country. It's a beautiful country. It's a complex, and it's physically magnificent. But I got to go, and I went early, and I interviewed people, and I did research. And then when I came home, I threw out everything I had written about Sarajevo, and I started again. And by that point, I had the whole beginning in Paris. And the tone is so different between the two sections. It felt to me that the tone in Paris was maybe more inviting than the opening of the Sarajevo story. So that's how I began to figure out the structure of the story, that it would be 5 sections and I would alternate between the two women. Because in some ways it's really both their stories.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Was any of the motivation of the 5 sections and the way in which you ordered ordered them back and forth, was an intent also to parallel these women so we could see them so much, even though they were so different, they were so much the same in many ways.
Yes, I mean, honestly, I have compassion for both of them. I mean, you know, Nina, she's really a sociopath by the end of she's so empty, though she does love her mother, so then maybe she's not a sociopath. But she has no human feeling for other people, really. And Mary is such a disaster, though. I feel that fact that she can actually give to her mother saves her in the end, in a way. But they both, look, it's hard to be a girl under the best of circumstances, and neither of them had the best of circumstances. And there's a quote in the front of the book, I can't remember it exactly, it's from Marguerite Duras. Do you have it there, Linda?
Yeah, it's very early in my life, it was too late.
I think that's true for both of them, that they had such traumatic experiences as children, that their paths were going to be hard. So yes, there are parallels. And I mean, they both want to be actors. I think there's a lot of jealousy between them. I think Nina is very jealous of Mary being American and having American beauty. She has a much different kind of beauty. And because all she wants to do is be a movie star. And she feels like Mary's life's been easy. And, you know, when you travel, a lot of times when you go to different parts of the world, people do feel like, what are Americans whining about? Because comparatively, it is much easier, even though a lot of it can be very hard.
Tell me how you landed, or when you decided to land in that Florida retirement community. That was such an incredible fifth section, and the way it ended was just amazing.
It was really, honestly, I didn't know how it was going to end. I knew I had to get them together. I mean, you couldn't just have them on parallel lines. They had to face each other. And where do people go when there's nowhere else left to go? It's Florida. I mean, they go for a lot of reasons. I know you actually love Florida, Linda. One of my best friends has a house in Florida, and he schlepped me all around the state and took me to the villages and I went to like 20 different communities. I figured out what kind of community her mother would be in. But it is a place to go if you want to have a second act with no history. I mean, you can go there and your life doesn't have to follow you. So that was part of it. And it's also a place where people aspire to go because it's easy and it's beautiful and there's the beach. And there is a big Jewish population. And it's very complicated. I mean, it's a very complicated state, and they're complicated. So that's where I decided they would go. Also, there was a Mossad agent called Cheryl Bentov. And I don't know if any of you have heard of this guy, Vanunu. Vanunu was a Israeli nuclear scientist who gave information about the Israeli nuclear power to the British press. And this woman, Cheryl Bentov, who was a Mossad agent, she pretended to be a woman who was sexually interested in him, and he was a man who did not see much action, kind of nerdy. And she got him to go with her to Italy, where he was kidnapped and taken by the Mossad to an Israeli underground prison, where he was held for 19 years, most of it in solitary. And then he was eventually released. But I looked up Cheryl Bentov, and what did she do after her cover was blown? She moved to Florida and she started selling real estate. So that's where I got the idea.
That's great.
It's a thing you can do. You can go there and have a life and start over. And actually, when I was in Florida, went to see her house where she lives with her husband, a very nice upper middle class house. Yeah, so that's how that came about.
Wow. Well, you know, when we were talking earlier, Helen, some people brought up the second person that you used. You used it a good deal in the beginning of the second section. And because we were talking about how that section has several points of view. And I was saying, well, it's, you know, the father's point of view, the mother's point of view, and then Samara's point of view. But then I was corrected by someone here who said, but it was also you, the reader's point of view, because that's how it begins. It was such an interesting use of second person.
I so love that person, because my idea was to implicate the reader and have the reader join in the opening to that. And again, it's because of what Sasha Hamon had said. You think you live in a beautiful country, but it can happen to you. And in my writer's mind, that translated into, do you live in a beautiful city? And so that became the invocation of that part. But going through that speaker is trying to find every way it could not be himself. And I think that at least I do this with the news. I'll read something horrible, and then I'll think, oh, but I wouldn't spend $250,000 to go look at the Titanic in a tin can. So that couldn't happen to me. Like, I'm always looking for a reason why it would protect my children. Or I think we try to find ways to distance ourselves from the events because they're so horrifying. And what I wanted to do was make it so that you could not distance yourself from the events of what happened to that man. And so I start out far out, and then we go in. And yeah, that was, you know, I think there's a point where he's like, well, you know, I wouldn't have been in Nagasaki. I would have been visiting my uncle, except I'm not even Japanese. I was just talking about the defense mechanisms of how we live in such a complicated world that's so scary all the time, that we're just always trying to push it away. But these things really do happen. When I was in Sarajevo, the people I spoke to, you know, it was neighbors who were friends. They'd gone to school together. It was intermarriage. And then they raped each other, and they stole each other's apartments. They killed each other's grandmothers. I mean, it's unthinkable. I feel like in my building, everybody's so nice in my building in New York. The idea that close-knit feeling of a community could be so terribly ripped asunder so easily and so quickly. And now they all live together again. I mean, it was 4 years of horrific madness. And I said, how can you be friends? I mean, two of my tour guides, one was Serbian and the other was Croatian. And they said, we're best friends. We're best friends. That's the past. We have no choice but to go back to the way we were before.
Wow. Well, I want to make sure we ask this question, because someone read your book on audiobook and said that the narrator was absolutely fantastic. And she was wondering, you know, if you had a say on who narrated your book.
Well, this was really weird. Okay, so yes, they send me voice samples, like 7 for each character. And I listened to them. And then I just told my husband, Bruce, who Linda knows as a magazine editor. And I was like, I can't figure this out. So he said, this one's better and this one's better. So I said, okay, those two. But they went halfway through the book with the woman playing who was reading the Mary sections. And then there's a line where manager Liz says to Mary, you could be a Scientologist, they're all so crazy. And she apparently stopped reading and said, I will not read this line. I'm a Scientologist, it's offensive, and I will not read it. So they had spent like 5 days recording her. So then they write to me and they say, can we leave out the line? What do you want us to do? And I was like, that's so weird. If you just took out everything that was offensive to you in a book, it would be like Swiss cheese, right?
Right.
So I called my editor and she said, no, it has to be what's in the book. And so we got another person. And they had to start all over again.
Wow. Oh my God.
Wow. But you think of the offensive things that are in so many books, and she could not cross that line.
Yeah. Oh boy. So, oh gosh, I have so much. There's so much more I want to ask. Okay, so which person in the book? This is someone who couldn't come tonight. The one person that actually came and sent questions. She said, which person in the book was the most challenging to develop for you?
That's interesting. Mary just came straight out of my fingertips. I don't know why. I have nothing in common with her whatsoever. But I do get very anxious, and she's very anxious. And you know, we all have some baseline pain, and I have some too. And I could channel it through her, even though there's nothing about my life that's I mean, I grew up in New York City. I'm Jewish. I'm 62. I mean, I was never a beautiful movie star. But she was easy. But Nina's was hard because I want you to feel for her, even though they both do despicable things. And I think that's part of the intention of the book, which is that there are quote unquote good victims and quote unquote bad victims, and they're bad victims. And you know, what happened in these situations with Me Too was that the women who were loud and wore provocative clothing and did nude scenes and maybe had affairs were considered bad witnesses. Mm-hmm. You know, and you had to try to find pristine witnesses. And what would make a woman, for me, and I am a very naive person, so even though I'm so old and I grew up in New York in the 70s, I am naive. And my first thought was, how can one woman do this to another woman? How could she befriend her and lie to her about rape and then try to destroy her for money? I just couldn't. I felt like if there's a line you don't cross with another woman, it's sexual abuse. But of course, people cross it all the time. And I've learned so much more. But when I started out to write the book, that was my animating question. What would make her do that? Mm-hmm. And I had to find out. And to do that, I had to figure out her whole life and what led her to those moments and what animated her.
You know, there was this one quick scene that set her personality in a way. I think it was the fourth part of the book. And after she left the birthright and she was a Mossad agent, and she had that one assignment in Tunisia, and she had a target. She was a visual artist, you know, remember that? Mm-hmm. She was a visual artist, and she had a target. And at the moment when the target came, she had to press that TV button and it blew him up, and she had no effect.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And that for me was the moment where I saw Nina and what was inside of her. Oh, she had nothing.
Nothing. I mean, her insides have been blown out.
Yeah.
But think about it. She's 3 years old, 4 years old, and she watches her father's best friend rape her mother. And they live in this basement, and her father disappears, and they don't have food, and they don't have light, and they don't have anything. And her mother collapses as a person. I mean, she has integrity and she supports her and she loves her, but she never goes back out into the world again as a woman.
Yeah.
And that's how she's raised. And then she, she joins the army. Israel is a tough place for everybody. And then she becomes a spy. So it allowed me to have compassion for her, even though she has no compassion for other people. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? I have no idea. Mm-hmm. But as a writer, I didn't want her to be a straw man.
Was there a part of the book that, I mean, obviously there are many parts of the book that had to have been difficult to write. I mean, in the process of writing it, because you're inhabiting these things and they're difficult, they're tough. Was there a part where you got to a point and you just you had to sort of pause?
I think that first rape scene is that way, with the mother and the child and the father. I think the rape scene with Mary and the rug, it's really hard. The scene at the Markala market where the bomb goes off and the children see their parents in pieces, and the child said, "Are they taking a nap?" Mm-hmm. I have children who are now grown, but once I had them, I couldn't stand any pain regarding children. And this book is full of pain regarding children. But what gave me courage is I used to teach with Colson Whitehead before he won 2 Pulitzers, and I know him, or I did. And when I read Underground Railroad, I thought he had to live in this world for 3 years to write it. Mm-hmm. I can write through this tough spot. Mm-hmm. My last book, Linda knows it, Come With Me, there's a kid commits suicide. And it was so hard for me to write. I was scared of it for months before. I talked to my therapist about it. I was so attached to this kid, and yet I had to kill him. I mean, it was horrible. And I just kept saying, if Colson could do that for 3 years, I can do that for these 3 pages. Wow. But yeah, it's tough. I mean, you don't write for your own mental health.
No. No. Did anyone else have, I'm sort of asking some of the things that we all sort of talked about, but anyone want to?
There's something that just came to my mind, and some people here, I've been to a few of these, know this. I work with a lot of women who have been victimized in their life. And I had never thought of this, because I think one of the overarching questions we have to ask ourselves is, why would a woman do this to another woman, as we just talked about? But I'm wondering, something you said earlier has been rolling in my mind right now. And it's, do you think Nina could justify it because her trauma came, for lack of a better word, legitimately, but Mary's, well, she chose to be an actress. She chose to walk in there. So it doesn't count as much. So I can be put, I mean, that's just something that came to me when we're talking about
interesting.
I think that's a very astute reading. I think that she feels that Nina feels that Mary is belly aching. She's like, so you had to have sex with an ugly fat man. You think I wouldn't have done that myself if it could have gotten me what I wanted? Look at my life. And to her, it was something that you had to do, or you had to endure. But these Americans are so fat, they're living off the fat of the land. And she did get to be a TV star, and she did get money, and she did get fame, and all the things that Nina wanted. Nina has a masculine edge to her. She has a Roman nose. She has a deep voice. In my mind, she's very beautiful, but in a very interesting way, not the type to be cast. Like Mary was really kind of like a Margot Robbie type, all American, perfect. You could put her in a million different things. Nina couldn't get anywhere in her career. She's so jealous of that, of even her accent is still indeterminate, right? She can't get rid of it. She can't really, obviously she's not a terribly gifted actress, but she's so resentful. She's so resentful. And I do feel that when I go to other countries, certainly in Bosnia and other places in the world, people are like, what are you complaining about?
Yeah. There was a question that the person who isn't here wanted to know. And I don't know if you and I ever even talked about this. She wanted to know who, I would even add, what inspired you to be a writer? You've been doing this for some time. You teach, you're a master writer, teacher of writing, and you've been at this for a long time. Where did it begin?
Well, the book is dedicated to my grandmothers. 7:32 p.m. And I had two very different grandmothers. My father's mother was illiterate. She was a peasant. She came from Russia when she was 21 years old. She never could learn to read and write. She was 4'9" because she was malnourished, and she was a girl. And she was one of 9 children. They had one pair of shoes they shared. And when she came, her father only had enough money to send one person, and he was going to send one of the boys. And she said, if you send him, you'll never hear from him again. But if you send me, I will send back for everyone else. And she was really tough. And she did. She brought over half her family till the Iron Curtain came down. She couldn't read and she couldn't write, but she told the most marvelous stories. She had a story for every situation. She was a great raconteur, and I would listen. And my mother's mother lived with us, and I shared a room with her growing up. And she spoke 7 languages and read and wrote in 7 languages. She went to gymnasium, which was school in Austria. She was a seamstress. She was very beautiful. Her father worked for a Polish lord. She grew up on an estate. And then World War I came and everything was destroyed. And her mother died of cholera. And one of her brothers were taken away by the Russian army. And then they sent her to America on her own. And then the rest of them were killed by the Nazis. And she ended up marrying my grandfather, and they had a laundry, and she was a laundry woman. So she had been brought up to think she was going to have a very beautiful life, and she didn't. But we shared a room, and she would tell me stories. And she told me many, many stories about her childhood. And it seemed to me that that is what kept her going through the pain and agonies of her life. So they both taught me to look at world history through the lens of story and their stories. And I don't think it was ever a conscious choice, because neither of them wrote. And certainly my father's mother, she couldn't write it. I was sick as a child and I was in the hospital, and she sent me a card, and my aunt wrote out in Yiddish for her, I asked God that you should be healthy. And then she copied it painstakingly onto the card in her own handwriting. That was how little skill she had. But she taught me to think in story. So I think that's where it comes from. I didn't start out writing about world catastrophes, but that's what I've ended up doing. I wrote about Holocaust revisionism. I wrote a book about 9/11. I wrote a book about two books about how the internet has disrupted our lives, and now this one. And it just sort of happened. I mean, I wrote some other books that weren't like that, but yeah, I think I'm trying to make sense of how we live through story.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Well, is there anything else anyone else want to ask? We've kept her a little longer than I promised, but yeah.
What are you reading right now?
What am I reading?
Yes.
My husband just gave me Mavis Gallant's stories, the Paris stories. So I started reading them. I just finished the latest Ferrante book, The Flying Life of Adults. And before that, I've been reading some poetry because a bunch of my friends who are poets have published. So I've been reading, I read Matthew Zapruder's book, which is a memoir of writing one poem, but it's really about his life as a father of an autistic child. But he goes through how long it took him to write this one poem. I just read Nick Laird's poems, and a friend of mine is his publisher. She gave it to me. The Galleys, and a couple other poets. And I'm gearing up to start researching something new, but I wanted to just read. You know, I don't often get a chance to just read. I teach, so I read for my students, and I read for my friends, and I blurb books, and I review books, and then I research my books. So where in there, oh, I read Trust, the Hernan Diaz book this summer. But rarely do I just sort of read randomly. And that's what I'm trying to do now, because it's just been so much work, and I love to read, and I forgot how much I love to read until I started doing it again.
Mm-hmm. Well, I can speak for all of us. This book was on so many different levels was just incredible. What it shared about human nature and history, and the extremes that impact what we become, you know. So it's I want to hear listen to the audio tape, because someone told me how great the audio tape is now, so then I'll listen to it again. It's worth it. Some books are worth rereading, re-listening too.
Thank you. Can I tell them now how I met you?
Okay, you can tell them.
So my husband and I were dropping off our two children at college, and the little one finally, and we were driving back through Columbus, and we stopped in German Village at this really cool hotel. And then they told us to go to this restaurant, and in the restaurant we're waiting for a table. And I think I was crying or something, because both kids had flown the coop, and Linda was there with her husband. And she said, I don't mean to interrupt, but it's really not so bad. She said, I felt like that for 3 weeks, and then me and my husband high-fived each other after our child left. And we laughed and we chatted, and she told us she had this bookstore, and I told her we were writers. And then when my last book, she wrote to me and said, do you want to come out to Bexley? And I did, and I love the store, and we've become friends from that moment where you gave me courage, and you were completely right. And anyway, both came back, and I even have one home now. So it's like not that they really left yet because of the pandemic and everything, but at that one moment, it was just lightened that painful moment for me so much, Linda. So
that's so special. And Izzy and Zoe, they're good. How old are they now?
Well, Zoe is 27, and she's just moving in with her boyfriend. He's in law school in St. Louis, so they're going to St. Louis, and Isaac is at home. We spent a year doing it was AmeriCorps, which is like Peace Corps in Buffalo, and teaching, and now he's trying to find a job.
Oh,
so yeah, so they're out of school. But
well, I'm going to be coming to New York, so I'm going to go offline and see if you're going to be in town when I'm there, so we can catch a glass of wine or something. Okay.
I love it.
Okay. All right. Well,
thank you guys so much for taking the time to read my book. I'm so grateful.
Oh, you are wonderful. This was just a delight. Oh my gosh. You knocked it out of the park on this one.
Thank you. I tried.
Yeah.
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 All right, everybody, good night, and thanks again for having me.
Thank you. Bye, Helen.
Bye.